Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be looking at the anime Yatagarasu, The Raven Does Not Choose Its Master. This is going to remain spoiler free, but I am going to dive into specific elements and discuss why I think this is definitely worth checking out. This is an anime that I don't see being talked about all that often, and so when I went into it I didn't necessarily have too many expectations. There are a couple of things that I really want to make note of before you jump into it, and then also just some aspects of this that I want to show some appreciation for. Kicking it off and jumping into what Yatagarasu is even about. This is a story that has a cast of characters, but I would say if you were to lock in and title one of them as your protagonist, it would be Yukiya. That said, because there is so much that the plot has to offer, there are so many characters that you could decide are the perspective depending on which plot ends up standing out the most to you, but how the plots intermingle and weave together I think was actually extremely masterful. It is a story about court intrigue, succession disputes, loyalty, murder, and mystery. Alongside that, you contemplate threats to the almost literal sanctuary that is the home of the Yatagarasu. If you're unfamiliar with what a Yatagarasu is, it is this mythical three-legged raven. Within their world, everybody that exists within the story essentially has the means to turn into a raven. There are some cultural aspects when it comes to how they determine who stays in raven form, also when it is or is not appropriate to do shifting. So all of that was really fascinating to uncover, and it's kind of just interesting background world-building development. But within this society, there is this sort of mythical golden raven who comes when there is something that is a threat to their society. It is believed that the current individual, the imperial prince who will eventually take over, it is believed that this individual is actually one of the golden Yatagarasu, the Kinu. However, the imperial prince that has been determined to, by some, be this Kinu, it is actually not the elder of the brothers. And these brothers happen to be half-brothers. So you find that the older one is the one that most people feel, because of his cunning, his intelligence, because of his willingness to hear other people out, and also just his great ability to govern. A lot of people want the elder brother to rule. That also includes the elder brother's mother, the empress. She wants her son on the throne. However, for the very reason of we need to ensure our entire society is kept safe and that we fulfill this prophecy of having the true golden raven as our ruler, we need to ensure that it is the younger brother that is the imperial prince who will go on to become the emperor. What was fantastically done about this plotline is it allowed for the best plausible deniability that I have ever seen, probably in anything. So typically when you find succession disputes, you know how the individuals who are at the center of the succession disputes feel. And when you do have these other kinds of stories, it's not just that you know how these characters feel, but oftentimes you do have a compelling story where you're following these different factions and you care about people on both sides, and you can actually see how both individuals would be good rulers, but there are things that keep them from being able to share power, and so you kind of find yourself debating whose side you're on. What this story did differently and kind of subverted the typical expectations of this is that you don't actually really know very clearly how either brother feels about their role, and because you sort of learn about them from the outside and you slowly close in on them and start to understand them better, as a result of that form of discovery and storytelling, you not only hear about them from the outside and then you're starting to figure out things for yourself, but when I was talking about plausible deniability, currently you have the imperial prince and then the elder brother who people want to be on the throne. And because other people want him on the throne, you will find that there will be threats to the imperial prince, and oftentimes you don't know if the person behind those threats was truly the elder brother, or if it's just people loyal to the elder brother who want to do things that they think would be beneficial to him. So there is this sense of, is he literally doing absolutely nothing and just allowing people to do things on his behalf, but he's not ever actually lifting a finger? I found that to be absolutely fascinating, but you don't know. And that's part of what was really fantastic about this sort of setup with a line of succession plotline. You also factor in a separate plot that does tie into this, which is that there is this court intrigue, not only in those individuals vying for power and potentially being threats to each other, but you also have these women who are sent from the various 4 areas of this land. And the 4 areas are basically categorized as the north, the south, the east, and the west. Each of them sends a young woman to go to this place somewhat in isolation, though she is surrounded by some ladies in waiting and also the other women who are competing to become the next empress. So these women come together, and the idea is that they're going to try and become the most perfect version of themselves to then be picked by the emperor. And this is seen as a essentially blessing to whichever kingdom sent them, whichever faction sent them, as it is likely that there's going to be some security and favor for that area. Not only is it that the individual is chosen, but also that any children are going to be from that area and might be partial to that area. So these women come together, and one of them is the most clueless person in the world, or at least you wonder, wait a second, is she clueless or is she pretending to be clueless? And the guessing game is fantastic. You have another one that seems exceptionally cutthroat. You have one that seems a little passive aggressive, and then you have one that seems like they don't care, and you're wondering, why is this person even here? And trying to pinpoint not only their motivations and if they're truly sincere or not, but also trying to figure out, are they trying to represent some kind of coup? Are they trying to represent something that actually is in alignment with the other brother, or are they actually truly wanting to become the bride of the imperial prince? And so there's a plotline going on with them. And if you've seen this story compared to Apothecary Diaries, I do think that the concubines and the way that there is sort of this cutthroat nature with them, that I think is one of the parallels between this story and Apothecary Diaries. The tone is not necessarily all that similar, and I definitely think that this is much more politically heavy and less fun. It's a little more serious, but I do think that element, if you like that element within Apothecary Diaries, the mystery and the murder that occurs, you will see that here in this section of the story. And then you have Yukiya, who is kind of thrown in the middle of all of this, as he ends up having to serve the imperial prince. He, like you, has just heard things about the imperial prince. He doesn't really know what he's getting into, but he has to serve him. And in serving him, he does find himself sometimes having to get involved with the mysteries and the conniving nature of what's going on with these women. Other times he is alongside the imperial prince and he's starting to pick up on the politics of everything. I do not think that necessarily Yukiya was like the blank slate character that you can just insert yourself in. I do think that his way of perceiving the world is similar to yours, so you can experience things alongside him, but that did not make him an empty character. In fact, of all the characters in this story, I found him to be the one that had the most growth. I liked where he started off. I think he started off in a very realistic place given his circumstances, which I won't say because it's part of the discovery of the story. But I wouldn't categorize anybody in this as being exceptionally lovable. I don't know if there's a character that I came away from this story with thinking, oh my gosh, this is a new favorite. Once again, because this has been compared to Apothecary Diaries, there is no Mao Mao necessarily in this story. But Yukiya was still a fantastic character. And I definitely felt that not only was he realistic to his circumstances, but the growth and the way that he started to change as the story progressed felt very understandable given what he was going through. There is sort of this idea of loyalty, like, you serve me, I need you to be devoted to me, and the Imperial Prince is constantly telling him, I need you to serve me, and I think you will, because I think basically like it's an honor to do so, and I think that'll be enough for you. And I watched it thinking, that's not enough. And Yukiya kind of has a realistic response. There isn't this plot convenient sort of thing where he just goes along with it because he believes in whatever is being told to him. He has human emotions. He has a family he cares about. He cares about the place that he has come from. He cares about his home. And I really, really loved him as a character and as our protagonist to get to know the inner workings of all the court intrigue through. That's not to say that he wasn't flawed, and that's not to say that the other characters weren't flawed as well. I think everybody had depth, but it was somewhat subtle. This is a story where I don't think that there are extreme emotions expressed very often. In fact, part of what made this so exciting to watch is all of the little ways in which things are being hinted to you. It's a story that I definitely think is fun to look back on with hindsight. And additionally, I actually would sit down and rewatch this whole first season again, just because once you have more information and you understand character relationships better and what everybody's actually doing, I think it would make for watching through from the beginning that much more impactful. There were certainly times where I would pick up on certain things and think, wait a second though, but if that was this, doesn't that mean this would be happening? And then you kind of sit and think, and I love stories that invite you to try to puzzle things out alongside them. One of the things that can be a drawback for mysteries is that when you have a story where there's great intrigue and there's great twists and turns, sometimes, even though the reveals are shocking, there is no way that you could have predicted what is going to eventually be revealed to you. But when you can give enough clues where somebody could piece it together, but they don't, and the reveals are still impactful, you're like, oh, I knew something was up with that, but I didn't realize that's what it was. And I actually think that that can make for the mysteries being that much more fascinating, and I do think it feels more masterful because you feel like it's more realistic. You could have figured it out, and you feel like there is this sense of inherent intelligence in the crafting of the story when you could have figured it out and you didn't. Although I also want to add, there is something to the deception of giving you certain things in a way that's a little more obvious, where you almost get distracted by the obvious thing that you figure out and you pat yourself on the back and then you don't realize, oh my gosh, I missed this very obvious thing over here. I also really enjoy when that happens, and I think that was present in this. Essentially what I'm saying is I think that the foreshadowing in this was basically perfection. But on that note, and this is the thing that I really wanted to kind of make known and make clear about this, the pacing, I thought it was great, but I do want to let people know it's gonna be a little bit, at least that was my experience. This is a story that if you jump into, I by no means think you're gonna be hooked after episode 1. It took a little bit for me to be invested. I think because I watched this alongside my husband, I think he was more invested earlier than me. Once I was invested, I was like, I'm all in, this is fantastic. But because of the nature of how this plays out, it does require a building of everything. It kind of needs to set certain pieces in place. And that's why I think it doesn't necessarily feel for a while like you have a main perspective, because you're just being shown a lot of different scenes, a lot of different conversations. You don't necessarily have a firm grasp on anything, and it really invites you to kind of to really focus and lock in and try to pay attention. For me, I would say it probably took about 7 episodes before I was really hooked. But once we got that far in, I think episodes something like 7 through 13, every single one of those episodes, I was fully engrossed in. I was so edge of my seat. And there is a slight shift in plot later on that I can't really talk about too much, but I'll just say that the story consistently has a feeling of nothing is what it seems, and that stays true throughout. So even though I mentioned episode 13 as being like, oh my gosh, up through that point, everything, 7 through 13, amazing. That's not to say that the rest of it wasn't, but there is this sort of rebuilding that happens again, and the consistent nothing is as it seems theme. I really want to hit this point. It needs some time to develop, but then once you get it, I think it's so good. And the last thing I want to talk about is the art and the animation. The animation, in my opinion, was fantastic. There's not necessarily a lot of action scenes, but when they happen, I really, really enjoyed them. I wouldn't say, though, if you're somebody who's looking for a really action-packed story, that this is going to fulfill that. It's not. It's so much more about the intrigue, but I do think that when the action scenes happened, they looked amazing. They were animated really seamlessly. The art style, I really grew to like. When I was a kid, I remember going to, I didn't use Blockbuster, I had a Hollywood Video down the street. But I remember going and just grabbing random anime movies and then watching them. And because I was a kid in the 90s, some of what I would pick up were anime from the 80s. And I feel like the art style itself, as far as the shape of the characters' features and how the length of their torsos and their bodies, and I know it's a weird thing to point out, but it was very reminiscent of a different decade. However, I think it utilized colors in a way that feels more present now, and so that sort of blending of styles I really, really enjoyed, because it felt like it was paying homage to other works of the past while utilizing a lot of the vibrancy that we have now. And I really, really liked it. But also it played really well into this idea of nothing is as it seems, because everything is so beautiful and everything is so bright, but there is something very dark underneath everything. So I think even the color use played into that thematic element. Overall, I thought the story was absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed basically every aspect of it. I really hope that we get another season at some point because I want to know what happens next. And if I'm understanding correctly, the source material hasn't been translated into English, so I can't go on to check out what happens next. I just have to hope that we get another season at some point. Even if we do not, though, I would still say check this out. I thought it was great. Really enjoyed it, and if you've watched it yourself, I would love to know what your thoughts were on it. If you want to talk any spoilers, or if there's anything that happened that really took you aback and you weren't expecting, feel free to elaborate on that. Just make sure you write a spoiler tag in your comment. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.